Hi everyone, I'm Ryan. I play guitar here at Awaken, and last week we talked about Manasseh and what I can only really describe as his reign of terror. This week we're talking about Josiah. Now, Josiah began his reign at 8 years old. He ruled in Jerusalem for 31 years and did what was overall pleasing in the sight of the Lord, which already is some huge contrast to Manasseh. So before we really get going in the passage in Kings, I want to take some context from Chronicles on Josiah's early reign. In Chronicles, it says that in the 8th year of Josiah's reign, he began to seek the God of his ancestor David. And in the 12th year, he began purifying the land, destroying idols. Now, in the 18th year of Josiah's reign, that's where we really pick up in Kings. He sends a man named Shaphan to supervise the restoration of the temple, to deal with money and various jobs in that project. And while Shaphan is there at the temple, a priest by the name of Hilkiah comes and says, "I found the book of the law hidden in the temple." And he gives it to Shaphan to then be taken back and read to King Josiah. So Shaphan does just that. He takes it back to King Josiah and he reads it to them. And when Josiah hears this book of the law, he tears his robes in despair. Now at this point, the law likely wasn't known, heard, or read for hundreds of years. And so Josiah likely had no idea just how bad it was in his city. And right after he hears this, he sends a group to the prophetess at the time, Huldah, who tells the group that disaster is going to strike the city and its people. However, due to Josiah's humility and repentance, it will not strike until after you have died and been buried peacefully. Josiah gets the message back, and once again he takes immediate action. He summons all the elders, and he takes them all to the temple. And then he summons all the people of Judah and reads the entire book of the covenant that was found to them. Now, this book is thought to either have been the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, or parts of Deuteronomy. And while he's doing this, he renews the covenant with the Lord, and he pledges to obey him by following all his laws, commands, and decrees. And then the people all pledge the same. So right after this, Josiah instructs the priests and temple gatekeepers to remove any articles to worship any other gods from the temple, and he has all those articles burned shortly afterwards. He does away with idolatrous priests, he burns the Asherah pole used to worship a Canaanite goddess, and he destroys the living spaces of prostitutes that were living in the temple. But Josiah doesn't just stop at the temple. He goes across the land and reverts many of the evil things that Manasseh had done. He defiles pagan shrines, he burns them, and he executes pagan priests on their very own shrines before returning back to Jerusalem. And upon returning back, he celebrates the Passover for the first time since the Judges. And this Passover, it says that there had never been such a Passover since the time of Samuel. So later, after the temple is restored, King Necho from Egypt is marching up with his army to battle at Carchemish. And Josiah marches out to fight King Necho. And we learn some interesting context from Chronicles about this scene. And it tells us that King Necho didn't want to fight King Josiah, at least not yet. And King Necho sends out messengers saying that I have no quarrel with you, and I've been sent by God to fight elsewhere. The message also warned not to interfere with God, or that Josiah would be destroyed. Now, unfortunately, Josiah does march out anyway. And in the battle, he's shot by enemy archers before he's taken back to Jerusalem and dies shortly afterwards. So while I was reading and studying this passage, a lot of connections to James showed up. The first being in James 4:8, where it says, "Come close to God, and he will come close to you." In the early years of King Josiah's reign, we see that he begins to pursue the God of David, and he takes action purifying the land and then restoring the temple. And when he takes that step to restore the temple, the book of the law is found, and it provides more guidance in the right direction. Another interesting thing is how James talks about humbling yourself before God. James 4:9-10 says, "Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor." And we see this exactly with King Josiah, with how he reacts, tearing his robes. And he's deeply troubled by how the community that he identifies with is falling short. And that's another interesting thing about Josiah's humbling, is that He's taking on an intercessor's role. He's not focusing on what I as an individual have done, but rather what we as a people have done. He's interceding for his people, and he's identifying with the sinners, which is very much akin to what we see in the New Testament with Jesus Christ. Upon hearing the word, Josiah takes immediate action. James 1:22 talks about how we can't just listen to the word. We must do what it says. Otherwise, we're just fooling ourselves. Josiah doesn't just listen to the book. He acts on it, and he pursues God to the best of his ability. And he pursues God to the best of his ability. Josiah fully commits to God's way, and he's not afraid to become an enemy of the culture he lives in if it means better following God. Josiah is clearly willing to completely defy what both his ancestors and his people had done and were doing in order to better follow his word. 2 Kings 23:25 reads that never before had there been a king like Josiah who turned to the Lord with all his heart and soul and strength, obeying all the laws of Moses. And there's never been a king like him since. King Josiah wholeheartedly followed the Lord, willing to get uncomfortable and take immediate action. And his story is one that greatly inspires me to this day.